Greetings, everyone. This is Von Dinnerbell, and today I want to talk about my thoughts on Armored Core Fires of Rubicon. Developed by From Software and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment, this game has had some diverse takes, it seems, across a few topics, and I'll figure I'll throw my thoughts into the ring now that I have managed to beat it through all the way through, and most of the way into a New Game Plus. First things first, let's talk about the cosmetic stuff. This game looks really good and is very satisfying to watch the destruction you cause behind you. This isn't some high-res stuff, but man, the style, the graphics is super well done, which is way more important. They also did not overdo it to the point of graphical hiccups, which for the mech game could have been an easy pitfall. They get tons of brownie points in my book for the sheer amount of the world you can destroy just by running through them with your mech. It can really mess up a city if you have the mind to roll through it all. I mean, just look at all this stuff. I mean, none of this stuff matters at all, right? It's just, it exists, you can hit it, you can blow it up. Some of the level designs were very frustrating with color schemes on red, which made things hard to register and my eyes bleed. But I'll just chalk it up to being old. It wasn't really prevalent in the game. They did some great unique enemies and actually quite a bit of personal robot customization. The personal upload emblems were a surprising touch I think people were generally caught off guard with.
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. Thank you very much, Mr. Roboto, for doing all the jobs nobody wants to. And thank you very much, Mr. Roboto, for helping me escape just when I needed to. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I wanna thank you. Please, thank you.
The music was okay. The general level-to-level music was atmosphere only and quickly became an thing to me. The boss music, however, was actually really great. That is, when you could hear it. Gunfire and explosions and the general robot beeps and alerts drown out a lot of it, but you won't care as you laugh maniacally or scream in rage. And don't try to tell me you weren't doing one of those things at some point in this game. We all know that's a lie, and it's okay. The story is a hot topic, it seems, in the community. This is one stem from the first chapter, and most of the second is a confusing mess of characters, names, events, and details that seem to have no web of connection or even point outside of, we give money and you go blow things up. The missions literally go from one group hires you to go hurt the other group, and then the next mission, the group you just wrecked hires you to go to wreck the first one you just worked for. It's almost comical. The story quickly comes together through in chapter 3. The issue I think might really be happening is a lot of people might be getting roadblocked by some of the end chapter bosses and don't make it to where the story really snaps together. Arguably, even when it makes sense, it didn't really catch any shocking surprises or twists, but I enjoyed it for what it was, and it did do a good job of making sense of how you wind up in another firefight, which in this game is more important. I think it's cool, although easily seen coming, was the multiple endings and mission choice decisions of making you pretty much, pick a side. Everyone is scummy, but who do you least want to turn into rubble? Let's get into the fun stuff, shall we? Let's get into the gameplay. The general control of gameplay is the first thing you see as you start off right off the top of the bat. The environment is a big win here. If you see a building or a ledge or even an enemy ship, you can probably land on and hit in the head. Collision with the world is very precise as well, so if you miss landing on a building, you missed. Do better. Every button works perfectly in its responsiveness, but depending on the mech you build, which I'll talk about next, it may not feel the way you may want it to be. Build diversity. It's been a while since we have seen a true mech game and everyone was hungry for the ability to build their brand of robot destruction. The secondary is to have their brand work, and not just be a throwaway build like some sort of terrible Path of Exile spec. Oh boy did Armored Core deliver. There was enough combinations, although not some crazy overwhelming amount, that you do generally see a fair amount of variety come from various players and can be seen to an extent in the PvP. In short, there are 3 real parameters. 4 movement mobility choices controlled by the legs you use, the weight you output yourself which will control speed and reactivity, and the energy use which controls what weapons and equipment your Terminator can power. There are 9 equipment slots and offensive and defensive stats, but all of them loop back to these 3 core numbers as far as your building decisions are concerned. Four of these slots are weapons, which I suppose you can count in the choice of robot building for playstyle, but still ultimately is regulated by those three decisions. There is still plenty of room to build your own vision, but there are enough limiters in play that if you build a flying spider robot focusing on range, you might have several matching pieces as the next guy just by what is available. Being a primarily single player game, this really does not matter. I can't stress this enough since PvP gets highlighted off and on, but the PvE is by far the biggest part of this game, so having some mirror match PvP sessions is just a side flavoring. I'm looking at you all you tank builds. With all that in mind, I want to loop that back to the general reactiveness of the game. It is quite literally by design that if you build a monstrosity of a hawk, it's not going to feel very fast and responsive. You are a slug, embrace it. If you build ultra lightweight, gotta go fast Mechasonic, you could feel that every button you press throws you into the stratosphere and you are trying to keep up. It bears noting that they protect you from really becoming slow, but if you try it, you can feel it. You will get what you build, and the reactiveness is very well done in this game across the spectrum if you keep that in mind. I do wish the repair kits were less delayed in their use, however. I had several deaths caused just by being locked out of a repair kit because I couldn't get off a missile fire animation or because I got pinged by a single laser that locked me out of use. Even if in function it works like Elden Ring Flask with its delay in use, it felt really out of place in a mech fight where everything else is so fast and instant. The missions themselves were all pretty fun. There's a mix of just turn off your brain and rampage through the streets mowing down enemies, epic 8-on-1 swarms, the 1-on-1 AC brawl, and the epic unique boss fights you can find, like the Sea Spider. I really can't think of anything bad to say about 90% of the missions. The carnage is simple joy, and exactly what I wanted to see in a Rock'em Sock'em robot game. The only real gripe was the final two sea weapons near the end. The all-red arena of the first one, mixed with his stupid high speed, made me reacting to anything a Mind Melter since everything blurred together and the ball sometimes just disappeared in the environment. It was like doing a World of Warcraft raid with purple swirls on a purple floor with a purple skybox. Other than that, there was an entire one-on-one PvE arena simulator, which is amazingly fun. Now for the topic that is probably the biggest controversial point in the community: game difficulty and balance. If you're watching this, you might have already heard the war between this game is way too easy versus this game is brutal. The correct answer, in my opinion, to all these camps is yes. Let me talk for a second about my build. I was a normal two-legged stomper carrying as much firepower and armor that my weight was near the top of what I could possibly hold. I was just an explosive brick boy with decent side-to-side boosts, but a slug trying to get into the air. I, for the most part, rode over 80% of the game, with the exception of the Sea Spider and the final two sea weapons I mentioned. The Sea Spider I got through after a few hours of whapping my head into it without any real changes, but the last two I threw my towel in. I could have killed him with what I had. Sure, probably, but the sheer amount of perfection needed, mixed with the RNG, was severe. I was several hours into the Cell 240 boss when I decided to give up and go completely cheese to get through it. I switched to the Gatling gun tank build and literally one-shot it, having never used a tank. It was mind-boggling how much simpler that just was. Barely needed any effort. So if you use a guide to build the overpowered mech specs or stumble into it, yes, this game will be too easy. If you go off the beaten path and go one of your own ideas, this game should just be brutal. Neither answer is wrong. As a side note, that after hours on the last boss dying, just so I could close out the win, I also tried the tank spec there and mowed it down like it was nothing. At the end of the day, consider it a difficulty slider. Every other game just has a button at the start that says easy, medium, or hard. This one has a button called play this robot if you hit a wall at a point. It's a single player PvE primary. I question why people even care enough to argue about it. I'm going to enter an edit here and say that the recent patch notes have them doing two different things: nerfing these wall bosses I mentioned back in the story session, and buffing a multitude of weapons that just didn't really work well. I'm well aware of the bipolar nature of the community on this, and I'm going to make my stance. I think people might be too much in the label from Software being a noob stomper game and won't let them off the hook in trying something a little new. I never got the impression that they made Armored Core with the intention of driving people's faces into the dirt like they meant to do in the Souls games. It always looked like they wanted people to see the game and the spectacle of the fights. I'm generally in favor of lessening the barrier to see this game, especially since it's not this long 100 plus hour game that can be level grinded like a Souls game can be. The second change is buffing weapons that were underused, and I do not think there's really any pushback here. A game like this one had no need to just nerf things. Just make other things good as well and let the players go nuts. The weapons they are selecting were definitely in need of these buffs too, since I did try some of these in my playthrough, and in some cases they were so weak they literally could not damage enemies through their passive armor. The other issue people have raised in the playtime and content they get. Yes, it is true that your play will probably average out around 20 hours, but I think there is something getting missed people may not see in the back end. Right after beating the game, it just kicks right back over with your same build. The missions start over about the same, but a few new choices kick in, making the missions later slightly different. And if you pick a different faction from the first time, you will flat out see new missions and even a new ending, in which case I believe there's 3, don't quote me on it, I'm not positive. There are new enemies you could fight, new bosses. The game just kind of changes a little bit. I know not everyone considers a new game plus as more content for them personally, but it would be completely unfair to say it's not content at all. I won't spoil anything, but I'll say this to consider. If there is a character in the game you just want to put into the ground because they annoy you, there's a story outcome for that. I also ran into a completely new set of one-on-one arena challenges that are owning the new Game Plus mode, which is great. I love these things, which leads to PvP. This is just a fun mode and is not ranked in any real measure, with no rewards outside of it being extremely fun. And yes, it is almost more fun to watch than play, and it is very fun time. If it stays unranked, which in all likelihood it will, balance issues be damned, just go mech murder mode and have a good time. If they do explore a ranking system, they definitely will need to do a checks and balance patches or just watch as no one cares, since there's definitely an overwhelming number of play the one overpowered tank build. From the few hours of PvP I've done, I would say if the tanks outnumber the other styles 3-1. And usually the team with the most tank wins too, although that's not necessarily guaranteed. As it stands currently, exists to exist for the sheer pleasure of it, which is just fine with me. The weapons update patch I mentioned earlier might easily fix this up in my opinion. I believe you're probably seeing more things, but back when I was doing the PvP, this was definitely a tank wins all scenario. Now, my final grade here is a solid A. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I think it is just missing a little more oomph to get into an S category. Perhaps it's just that I was having so much fun that I just wanted more. I know some game raters will say talking about the price of a game versus hours of playtime is a faulty topic, but I would argue that it's good practice to think in terms of a cost versus benefit comparison. In many cases, what you spend in a game, in many people's minds, should correlate to the hours you spend in it. I would argue it's about the enjoyment you get out of it for its cost. People could go to a 2-hour movie for 10 to 15 bucks, for God's sake, or I'll go out drinking for 4 hours for a $65 bar tab. This game is at $60, and even if you only do one playthrough and don't go back in to see some different missions and story endings, it would still be worth it. This game is just plain fun. So what do you think? Do you think I'm off on my thoughts, or do you think I'm on the money? Let me know in the comments, and do the bell, like, subscribe thing if you want to see more of what I have coming. I stream live often on Twitch as Bell, with a link in the channel description. You're free to mock my struggles or whatever I'm playing at any given time. Until next time, everyone, though, dinner's done.